Okay, old school comics review. Okay, today we're going to look at classic Defenders. This is going to be issue 47, 48, 49, and 50 from 1977. I really should include issue 46 in this because it's kind of the prelude to the story. This is basically Defenders versus Scorpio, and 46 is basically a kind of actually it's kind of a transition issue. It's a reintroduction of Scorpio, and it kind of ties up a few loose ends from the previous issues, and it kind of establishes kind of where the comic's gonna kind of go from here on in for the next several issues. The only thing about this is I have no idea what happened to my issue of 46. I don't know if I just misfiled it somewhere, or if I just lost it a long time ago, or gave it away, or traded it, or something, and just forgot that I did it, and just thought that I still had it because I remember reading it a long time ago. But basically, just to tell you from what I remember from reading it from 15 years ago, basically, like I said, Scorpio's reintroduced. Well, just to explain for people who don't know, The Defenders is a comic that Marvel Comics published back in the 70s and 80s, and the Defenders were kind of different from like the Avengers and the Justice League and characters like that. Um, they described it back then as a non-team because uh, basically the group didn't have any sort of official sanction or anything like that. They didn't have a real headquarters. They had a sort of pseudo headquarters, but they didn't have ties to the Pentagon like the Avengers do. They weren't sanctioned by the UN. They didn't have the respect of like NASA or anything like that, like the Fantastic Four do. They're basically kind of like in a way the underdog characters or the misfit characters. These are the guys who would be like saving the world from monsters, and nobody really knew or cared or whatever. Basically, in the early days, it was Doctor Strange, the Incredible Hulk, and Namor. Sometimes the Submariner would show up, and then they gradually brought in other characters, and characters like Nighthawk and Valkyrie and Hellcat. Real B-list, C-list characters who kind of in a way didn't have any place else to go. They hung out at Doctor Strange's house for a long time, and like I said, 46 basically, Doctor Strange kind of like leaves the group. Luke Cage was in the group for a while. He leaves. They had a female Red Guardian. She goes back to Russia. So that goes on. Scorpio comes in and does some stuff, and then another thing that happened is they kind of wrapped up a plot, or it wasn't really a plot. There was a kind of set up subplot that was going on through Steve Gerber's run of Defenders, where a elf would show up with a gun and he would like just miscellaneously murder someone, and they kind of wrapped up that story, or they kind of stopped it, I should say, and that was the end of that story for a while. They actually did later on do a story where they actually dealt with who this elf with a gun was and why he was murdering people and so on and so forth. But at this point, they just kind of stopped it and said that was it for that. Okay, so anyway, we're going to talk about 46, 48, 49, and 50. Basically, let's see here. We've got a story where Scorpio, well, just to explain who Scorpio is. Scorpio is a character who originally showed up in Jim Steranko's run of Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. He showed up in a couple of issues of that, and then he showed up not very long after that in a issue of the Avengers, where it was learned that Scorpio was actually the long lost brother of Nick Fury. And then not only was he a supervillain, he was part of an international crime cartel called the Zodiac. And of course, everybody has, astrological signs as their gimmick and so on and so forth. And the Zodiac was used a couple other times in the Avengers and blah, 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 blah. Okay, it's years later, and where it picks up now is Scorpio has been laying low for a long time, and now he's going to bring out his master plan, and he's going to take over the world with some evil robots or something like that. And the Defenders get involved, and they're going to stop him, and blah, 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 blah. Okay, couple of interesting things going on here. Well, issue 47 has a real, well, it's not very interesting. It's only interesting in a historical type of way. But there's like a really like needless fight with Wonder Man. And this is like classic Silver Age Wonder Man where he has the green suit. And it's the classic setup where, the heroes kind of, meet up and they're like, well, who are you? Well, no, who are you? No, well, who are you? And they have a big fight that really has no reason to happen, but it's there because, back in the day, kids like seeing heroes fight, of course the misunderstanding is cleared up and blah, 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 but that's what you get in 47. My favorite issue in this story is, actually 48, which really kicks off proper the whole plot about Scorpio and what he's all up to. You get a very interesting depiction of a supervillain here. Basically, like I said, he's been laying low for a long time, and it comes out that he gives this pretty interesting monologue when he goes on about the cruelty of the world, how the conformity of the world, how the world wants to fit you in this mold, and, resents you if you don't fit in whatever box they put you into. And basically he talks about how old he is and so on and so forth. And what you really get here is a portrait of a guy who's never really been very successful, hasn't been successful in his life. He's estranged from his brother. He hasn't been a very successful supervillain. He goes on about his age. He's like 52. And his whole deal really is he wants to take over the world because basically he's depressed and he's going through a midlife crisis. And this is his last chance to do something interesting, or not interesting, but do something meaningful. And I think that's a real interesting motivation for a supervillain. Usually in the old days and even now, supervillains want to take over the world or do whatever because of either revenge, or they're megalomaniacs, or they kind of want to save the world, but they don't want to go through the government or anything like that to do it. They think they're the only people who could do it. And here's a guy who's like, yeah, I never amounted to much, so this is my last chance to do something, When he's not, doing his supervillain stuff, he's sitting in this dark room being depressed and listening to old records, Another really interesting thing is there's a pretty kind of funny ongoing thing where he is constantly, well, he's trying to think of himself as a good host. He's always talking about, well, we need to go out and get some more beer. He kidnaps a couple of people and he's offering them beer. He kidnaps matter of fact, Moon Knight. I didn't mention Moon Knight has a guest appearance in this story. There's a pretty funny bit where he catches Moon Knight, puts Moon Knight in a death trap, and says, hey, you know what? You're my enemy, but I thought you were a classy guy. I'm going to give you one more beer for the road, And it actually sets up a pretty funny gag a couple pages later, which I won't give away. But I think that's a really, really, really interesting, like I said, depiction of like the supervillains. Of course, things go on. The heroes find out about this, that, and the other thing. They break free. They put an end to his plans, and blah, 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 blah. The other thing I think is interesting about this story is the art. The art is by Keith Giffen, Keith Giffen. And this is the same Keith Giffen who's like doing stuff for Marvel and DC these days. Same guy from Justice League International back in the late 80s. Same guy that's doing like the Annihilation Conquest and some of the cosmic stuff for Marvel nowadays. And he was doing the art on here. And one of the funny things is, or I shouldn't say funny things, but really interesting things is he's kind of working in this very pseudo Jack Kirby-esque style. And it starts out kind of sort of slightly Jack Kirby-ish, but then a couple issues it gets very Jack Kirby-ish, and I'm not too sure if it's just because of the inkers, which I kind of think it is. Um, Klaus Janson does like issue 47, and he has really thick inking style, and he almost overpowers the other pencilers and people that he works with. But the next couple of issues, it really comes out. You see Jack Kirby-ish shading techniques and things like that come out with the other inkers. Dan Green, Mike Royer, who was a guy who inked Jack Kirby a lot back in the day, back in the 70s, and so on and so forth. So, like I said, it's very interesting to look at. One thing I kind of think about these days is that I wonder what Jack Kirby himself would have thought about that, because he was still around back in the late 70s. He was still there, and I kind of wonder, how does he even start? Does Keith Giffen just go in there and go, wow, I really, get the assignment, and then go, I really love Jack Kirby so much, and I'm just going to draw just like him? Does one of the Marvel editors say, you know what, why don't you draw this like Jack Kirby, because, we think this is really cool, or what, Does Jack Kirby look at this stuff and go, way to go, kid, way to pick up the torch? Or does he go, those dirty so-and-sos, they didn't want to pay my page rate, so they get this kid in here and tell him to draw in my style. Dirty effers, I don't think Jack Kirby talked like that. I don't know him, but, but I think that's really interesting. Like I said, it's a really fun issue. You get really interesting depictions of the characters. Oh, a pretty funny thing from a kind of more fan-oriented thing or editorial thing. There's a pretty, in the letters page in issue 47, there's a pretty interesting thing from the editors where they actually apologize for why the last couple of issues there's been like 6 different script writers for the last couple of issues, and they basically just say, this guy's got more editorial things going on. This other guy, he just hasn't been able to make it because of his schedule, and these other people just kind of came in to pitch hit, and it's kind of a drag, because I know we promised we're going to have this story plot and that story plot, but we really couldn't do it. We had to kind of do this other stuff, but if we didn't do that, we would have been forced to just run a reprint, and we didn't want to do that. So it's pretty interesting that they just pretty much come out and say, hey, we fell behind, and we had to have these other guys come in here and pitch hit. And there's kind of a slight apology, but you also got a direct explanation about why things are going on. And it's also pretty funny too here, because this is like old school campy Marvel Comics Silver Age, so of course everybody's got like a goofy nickname. So Klaus Janson is not just Klaus Janson, he's Klaus the Kinky One, Roger, how do you say his name here? I think it's Slipher, he's Roguish Roger, There's Dave the Dude, Keith Giffen is the GIF, and so on and so forth. So I think that's pretty interesting. And also in issue 50, they have this big, let's see here, pinup, I guess you would want to call it, of like the Defenders, the new headquarters or hangout. Matter of fact, it says the Defenders Long Island Hangout, and this is Kyle Richmond, Nighthawk's kind of ranch area, and they have this kind of pseudo blueprint breakdown. It's like, here's the road to the highway, here's where people live, here's the meeting room, here's the bungalows, blah, 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 blah. And then they have like headshots of all the people who've been into the Defenders up until that point. So anyway, I think the comic's pretty interesting. I would say go check out, if you want to find the individual issues, I'm pretty sure you can get them pretty cheaply, You'll check out your local comic book store. If you want to do that, get Essentials Defenders, I believe number 3 has reprints of these comics. I think they reprint something like issue 40 to 60, something like that. And you can read the stories that way. So, okay, anyway, that's it. I got to thank you very much for listening. Tell me what you think. Check out my blog. Thanks, and you have a great one, all right? Thanks.